How is everybody doing? Strength Chat episode 155, and today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I'm joined by a coach passionate about helping people move without limitations. He's trained dozens of first-round draft picks across major sports in the US, as well as a national championship-winning baseball team and countless general population clients. Today I am joined by the one and only Conor Harris. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. How are you? What's been happening in your world?
Oh, man, I'm doing well. I live in Portland, Oregon, for those who aren't aware. And just because of the whole COVID situation, it's been very, very difficult and challenging for me to find time to train people in person. In fact, it's quite impossible right now because we're very, very strict over here. And because of that, I've had to make the transition to online, which, you know, if you asked me not a year ago, maybe like a year and a half ago, like, do you ever see yourself as an online trainer? I would have said, absolutely not, no chance. So it's been a really interesting transition to get to the point where I'm at now, but I've actually really found a passion in it. And I found a little niche that I really enjoy being in. But just right now, I'm trying to grow my online outreach so that once I start training people in person again, I won't have to worry about that as much because I will already have established that and I don't have to worry about building it. So hopefully it blends well once this whole COVID pandemic thing is over, then I can train people in person. Get back to doing what I love in that regard, but also have a little bit of the online thing going as well.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I know, because at the minute, the UK is on lockdown. So, everywhere in the UK, gyms are closed. We've been kind of going in and out. But it's a little bit different sort of over in the States because I know some places have had gyms open and some are staying closed. How have your, because I mean, I've been starting to do a lot more online because I think it's the world that we live in now, especially with clients who maybe I couldn't train in person, who live a little bit further away. But how have you found? You've said you enjoyed it, but how have your clients found sort of the transition to online coaching with you?
I think it's been challenging for everyone involved. I think nothing is harder in the whole world than telling someone how to do something over a Zoom chat that they haven't done before, especially people that aren't familiar with how to use their bodies. So it can be an incredibly challenging process. But as a coach, it's really important for me to stay very patient, for me to stay very understanding, have some empathy with the people that I'm working with, because if they're going to pay me for a service, I need to be the one that's very calm and the one that's like, okay, I know this is Zoom. This is really, really hard, but we need to, maybe a different cue will work. But that's the thing that really helps me is that if I find a cue that works over Zoom, and if I can get someone moving better over Zoom, then I can do anything in person. You know what I mean? And I think that's an opportunity rather than a hindrance. And I think that the clients themselves, I found that, I've gotten in the groove a little bit to the point where clients don't necessarily find it as hindering, for lack of a better term, than they did before, because everyone is just used to this at this point, as sad as that is. But it's also a good thing because it's no longer like, oh man, we got to get on Zoom. It's just like, no, it's just what we do.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I know, especially when the gym closed, we've got online classes, but I think you can sometimes feel as though you've lost a little bit from that, one-to-one contact. But having Zoom check-ins, and I think it has, allowed other skill sets to be brought up a little bit more, which I think is good. On a little bit of a tangent, I was thinking about when you were speaking there, have you changed any of the assessments that you're doing by coaching online, or how have you sort of managed that? I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of other topics, but that's why I stuck with the name Strength Chat, because sometimes something comes in my head and I'm like, I wonder how you do assessments.
I love that. That's a good question. Yeah, absolutely. I've had to change a lot of the assessments that I do. And honestly, now that I've done it for a while, I'm very comfortable with the assessment process. We can dig into it if you want. But essentially, everything is obviously extremely hands-off, and it's all on the person who is, it's all on the individual who I'm working with. I can't touch them, obviously. So I've had to get away from the manual table assessments where I have, I'm taking them through like passive range of motion and active range of motion. That whole passive thing is off the table now, literally.
Yeah.
So,
so
essentially, it's all on the person, and I have to cue them. And I could do it in my sleep. I could recite how to do these assessments in my sleep at this point, because it's just I know exactly what to say it and when to say it, because I know how people are going to compensate. They're going to try and cheat and things like that. And it's totally normal. But yeah, it's been a very interesting way to find what the limitations are without me being able to touch anyone or even get close to someone or even position someone's body.
Yeah. It is. I think it's just adapting it a little bit, and I think the more you do something, the more it's like when you're coaching in person, you get into a little bit of a groove, and I think once you get the systems in place to be able to do it online, you get a little bit more of a rhythm with it. But I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit more of that sort of later on. But for anyone listening who might not know your background, how you got involved in coaching and the athletes and clients that you've worked with, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I started off just like pretty much anyone else who starts off as someone in strength and conditioning, as someone who wants to work with the highest of elite athletes, the most elite that there is out there. And it's a pretty similar transition that happens. You start to work with younger people, and then you start to progress upward from there. I got to the point where I started working with some higher level athletes, and then it got to the point where I realized that it wasn't necessarily about the reward and the notoriety from working with high level elite athletes, because I think that's really what a lot of it is. I want the recognition, I want the status, the significance of working with people that are elite. But to me, that's something I had to think about in a personal journey. I had to take myself, because am I doing this for my ego or to help people? And I think once I decided that the more important thing is obviously to help people and provide value to people's lives, I started thinking, okay, I can probably reach more people. I can probably help more people if I just start going after more general population people. So that's basically what I decided to do. And selfishly, that helps me reach more people, right? So that helps me grow my outreach. But at the end of the day, I feel more reward. I feel more fulfillment from helping as many people as I possibly can and making that impact on the world. And there's nothing wrong with working with elite athletes. I think it's awesome. In fact, I'm doing it on the side a little bit right now, but I find so much value in helping as many people as I possibly can. That's why I try to stay without a specific population niche, because humans are humans at the end of the day. And we'll get into this, I'm sure. It doesn't matter if you're a powerlifter. It doesn't matter if you're a 90-year-old grandma. It doesn't matter if you're a 100-meter elite track athlete. You're still a human with 4 limbs, 2 arms and 2 legs.
What humans over there in space?
I'm working with some really elite athletes.
I think that's cool. I know for me, I had it in my head when I first started coaching. I wanted to be S&C coach at the top teams and everything like that. And from being in that environment through internships and that sort of stuff, the amount of time that you actually get with them, it's few, and it's those small little margins that you're trying to adjust. But yeah, seeing someone come in who has limited movement or has maybe got a little bit of pain, and be able to see them progress. Yes, it's still great to see these elite athletes and see them progress and get PBs, but you said it there, being able to help people, I think, is why people get involved in coaching, because any success that anyone gets, like I know for me, as a so I do the majority of sort of like the strength training and muscle building at the gym that I work at, whether it be powerlifters or general strength training. I find myself getting more excited about clients doing well than myself going to competitions. It's kind of like, I've got to go do it, but you find yourself getting excited, and great to see people lifting more and being able to challenge his range of movements, which I know you mentioned there, not a specific population, but I'm going to touch on a little bit of a specific population now. You released an eBook of Bulletproof Powerlifting. For anyone that hasn't seen it, 100% I'd go and have a look. There's some really, really good stuff in there. But what I wanted to touch on is just want to talk a little bit about the reasoning behind sort of Bulletproof Powerlifting, and as well touching on sort of the importance and what impact on improving movement can have on performance.
For sure. Yeah. So like I mentioned before, like we all have 2 arms, we all have 2 legs, and we're meant to, as human beings, we're meant to move, right? I guess what we're designed to do. We're supposed to go through this, basically this gait cycle. We're supposed to have, and I'll connect the dots in a second here, but it's all about moving one arm, moving one leg, and alternating in nature, reciprocal action, essentially. So whatever is going on one side of the body, generally speaking, in human movement outside of the gym, the opposite is happening on the other. But the issue is, and what I see time and time again, is people, not even just powerlifters, especially powerlifters though, they're doing a lot of heavy, symmetrical, bilateral stance activities, which means that they're doing barbell bench press, barbell back squats, barbell deadlifts. And those activities are great. I use them myself all the time. I could not live without them. And they are in no way a bad exercise. There's no real bad exercises. But essentially, if we do those things over and over again for an extended period of time, and we don't do anything else, and those are the only things that we're doing, we're teaching our body to do the same thing at the same time on both sides of our body. And let's say you have an asymmetrical body, which if you're a human, you absolutely do. If we can agree that we have a heart on our left side, a liver on our right side, and a brain that's asymmetrical, if we can start there and we can all agree on that, then you're asymmetrical by nature. You factually have asymmetries within your body. And then if you overload that pattern over and over again for a period of time, then you could, if you have potentially an asymmetry that's underlying and causing you to have maybe a little bit of a hip shift in your squat, maybe your bar path on your bench press isn't 100% asymmetrical all the time, then those things build up over time. And some people can get away with that and never have an issue their whole lives. Other people do it once and then their shoulder gets blown out. And most people are on a spectrum in between those things. And it's all about knowing what your individual limitations are, what your training volume you can handle is, because injury is so multifactorial that you can't just boil it down to this stuff, because there's how much sleep did you get the night before? You know what I mean? That's going to feed into all this stuff. So with that being said and that out of the way, if you are overloading a pattern and you're overloading your body in a certain way for an extended period of time with tons of heavy weights, and you're doing it in the bilateral symmetrical stance, and what's going to end up happening over time is you're going to get very stiff because your body is going to adapt to the demands that are imposed on it. So we see powerlifters that walk around like penguins, you know what I mean? Like they don't really have much rotation. Their arms don't move very much because their body has adapted to the imposed demands on it. That's specific adaptations to imposed demands. That's the SAID rule. And then that's exactly what's happening with these powerlifters. So they're moving very slow. They're moving very slowly with tons of compression. So they feel like they're doing that outside of the gym too, because they are. Yeah. So that's the issue, right? So if our body is just trained to do one thing, then it's going to adapt to that one thing. And I think powerlifting is a great sport. Love it myself. I work with a lot of powerlifters, mostly in a rehabilitation setting, because what they end up doing is they come to me and they have no range of motion outside of what they would use for their power lifts. So what we would then need to do is we need to retrain the body to have a little bit of alternation to it, right? We need to train the body to, for example, when you're walking, like I said earlier, you're going into certain joint actions on one side, the opposite on the other. We need to get that back a little bit. We need to get you to start to get your body to breathe a little bit better, which can sound a little bit strange to people. But if you can get your body to breathe better, then your whole body is going to downregulate, first of all. But you're also going to teach your body to expand one side of your body, compress the other, expand certain portions, compress the other, instead of the whole thing just being compressed. You know what I mean? And I'm talking about a lot of different things right now, but these are to summarize my point, the whole thing is that if we only train one way, we're going to adapt to that one way of training. And then we're going to become very stiff and immobile, and our range of motion is going to be limited. That could be a good or bad thing, depending on the demands of the task. And then if we're not doing any unilateral activities, then we're not training specific human movement, which is what we do outside of powerlifting. So I think you can have the best of both worlds, and it's important to consider these things. And that's what the book is designed to do.
Yeah, I think that was just trying to touch on a couple of points that you mentioned there. In when you're looking at the book, you've sort of divided it up into daily drills that you can do, which are like breathing drills and exercises, and then exercises that you can add into your warm up. And you know, it's maybe not just powerlifters. but also people just involved in strength training as an umbrella, if you like. And sometimes, you know, they might do a warm up for if they're coming in and doing squats, they're going to do a certain warm up for that. They're going to do a certain warm up for deadlifts. But on the days that they're not training, they might just they think, oh well, I'm going to go. You know, you mentioned about gait in the book as well. Oh well, I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk, or I'm going to go for a walk. So that'll be fine. You know, I'm still getting out. I'm still keeping that base level of movement, and only focusing on the warm up when I'm actually in the gym. How important sort of are those you know, daily drills and the impact they can have on performance, as well as making sure that you're covering all the bases in a warm up?
For sure. Yeah. So first of all, just for context, I'm glad you said that, because the book isn't a powerlifting program. It's designed for you to have your powerlifting program and then just have some drills and some other things you do to make sure that you don't fall down the common path of common powerlifting injuries and just stiffness overall. So with these drills, the daily drills are important, and people might say, well, why do I need to do something every day? But it's the specific adaptations to impose demands that we're talking about here. So if you've trained yourself and most powerlifters have been training for a while, right? Because a lot of them are pretty strong. So their body has spent years adapting to one thing. It's going to take you some consistency. It's going to take you some time to unravel that a little bit. So that's why the daily drills are there. Or so you can give yourself consistent input to get a consistently different output. And we don't want to take you so far away from stiffness, because if you're not stiff enough, then your power lifts are not going to be as good. So it's finding a balance, right? And I think that balance can absolutely be found. And it's just a matter of finding one spectrum of super stiffness, big extension pattern, to down regulating your nervous system, getting some alternating action in there, allowing your body to just unwind a little bit. So we need to find the happy medium between these things.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, okay. So with the program and the daily drills are just meant to be, 15 minutes every single day. Get your body breathing a little bit better, get yourself moving a little bit better, and just getting your body to understand that. Another thing with powerlifters is they just do the Valsalva maneuver, right? Heavy bracing, and then they're just pushing air forward. But when you push air forward all the time through the Valsalva maneuver, what you're doing is you're teaching your body to go into a heavy extension pattern. And you're teaching your body that I want pressure and air to go forward into my belly, which is, okay, your lungs are in your rib cage. So first of all, we need to be able to still expand our rib cage. We still need to be able to get that 360 degrees of diaphragmatic breathing and expansion. And that's important, because if we're only breathing into our bellies, then air is only going forward. Air is only being pushed forward, and that's going to increase our pelvic tilt, our anterior forward pelvic tilt, which increases our low back arch. And so if we breathe 20,000 times a day, then you're doing 20,000 reps every single day of pushing your center of mass forward onto your toes, increasing your extension pattern, and just basically locking up your body. And that is a simplification. It's not always that simple, but it's very, very commonly the case with powerlifters. The number one thing I've found to help powerlifters with a shoulder, with a stiff upper back, is just to get their diaphragm to start helping expand the rib cage. If that is the step one, that makes the biggest difference time and time again. And that can sound crazy to people. You mean like breathing is going to help my shoulder feel better? 100%. If you have not addressed that step, if you have not taken that leap to go and do that, I would say that is the number one thing you could do for yourself to improve how your shoulder feels.
100%. And, it's actually been something that I actually put a post out yesterday, actually, with one of my clients who with the amount of kit that she's got at the minute, she can't do a lot of strength training. However, sometimes when she's training, I don't know whether you've had this with clients, but sometimes they'll hold the breath, if you're not doing it, but hold it throughout the entire movement. So we've been doing some sort of like breathing drills. And actually, when I first started speaking to clients about breathing, it's kind of like, oh, well, I do it every day. It's just, I just do it. Whereas actually, it's one of those things that, you can still, my biggest thing is trying to be as efficient as you can with everything. And sometimes with breathing, I think because, it's not maybe thought of a lot. You can make that a lot more efficient. And I think you're spot on with what you're saying there. You sometimes, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if your breathing isn't as efficient as it could be, you are missing something out there, which, I completely agree with. And the daily drills on that, I think it's often, I know I've, sometimes overlooked it a little bit, whereas, you said there 15 minutes a day, it's not a massive amount. Whereas when you start speaking to clients about, look, every day, these are the drills that you need to do. And they're thinking it in their head as though it's a workout, as though, I need to find an hour in my day. Whereas, I've got some clients that are just doing it first thing on the morning when they get up. It's part of the morning routine. You can find 15 minutes somewhere. You said at the start, obviously work with quite a lot of powerlifters in terms of sort of rehabilitation, and mentioned about powerlifters that have trained for quite a long time and have a vast amount of strength. And I kind of wanted to touch on, does it matter how long you've trained, whether you've to add these in? Because I know, at opposite ends of the spectrum, there's the complete beginners that are trying to take everything in, to be like, right, I need to do this, I need to do that. But then at the other end of the spectrum, there's people that have got, a really good foundation base of strength, maybe have a couple of competitions or have been going to the gym for a long time and are thinking, well, I'm already strong, so why do I need to do these? What sort of your experience of that, and how do you address that as a coach?
For sure. Yeah. And I wanted to hit really quick. I think you made a really good point about, why is this breathing stuff important? Well, it's not only just your shoulder and your rib cage. It basically also helps your pelvis get into a better position, because your rib cage is directly connected to your pelvis through your spine and sacrum. So if you're going to put your rib cage in a better position, your hips are in a better position. And as crazy as it sounds, sometimes, and I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes you can get someone to improve their respiratory function and then improve the position of the rib cage, and then their hip mobility increases. Things like this. So it's all connected, and that's my point. And by no means is this the only intervention you should be using. It's just an important one to consider, which is something also I want to make sure is clear to people. But I think if you understand the holistic nature of how the body works together, then that's a really important point and just consideration to have. But to answer your question, in terms of, does it matter how long you've trained for? Absolutely. So if I were to pick up powerlifting seriously tomorrow, and I'm a fresh newbie, never really lifted weights in my life, then my body, like neurologically, is going to need to adapt to the demands of the task first. And then I'm going to actually start getting some physiological adaptations as well. So it depends how far along you are in that cycle. But let's say you've been doing it for a year, but then for, 24 years before that, you weren't doing any sort of powerlifting or weight training. You were an athlete. You were, a basketball player. Let's say that. And then your body is still relatively, this is still relatively a new and fresh stimulus to you, relative to someone who's been powerlifting for 8 years and they weren't an athlete before that. So the context of who you're working with absolutely does matter. And the longer you've been doing it and the older you are, then it's going to be harder to get yourself out of that pattern, because your body is so used to being in one basically orientation. It's fixated itself because it feels comfortable managing gravity and lifting weights in that position. Whereas if, like you or me, and we just started powerlifting, so let's say we've never lifted, put ourselves in powerlifting for a year or two, we would be able to get out of that quicker. So it does absolutely matter how old and how long you've been doing it for.
Yeah, I think as well, when you mentioned the first bit there, when you mentioned about breathing, that it can help, but not all the time. I think that's a good point to touch on, because I think sometimes when content gets put out there, everyone's thinking, oh yeah, this is going to fix all my problems, but it's just one area to look at. Which, I think that was a good point and a good thing for people to bear in mind, that if you just focus on your breathing and address that, it might be something else, in the chain that needs addressing. But I think with when you answered about, depending on the level of the person, it does depend on their background and that sort of stuff. Because what's quite interesting is, and it'll be interesting to see your thoughts, there's quite a lot of people who top level powerlifters or strength athletes that have actually come from a different background, that have come from a little bit more of an athletic background, which, you know, for some people within that weight category or within that sport that might have been just doing powerlifting for a long time, to see these athletes, if you like, coming from another sport coming in, you know, they have other ways of thinking about it. Because do you think that's down to the variation of training that they might have had compared to powerlifters, which is just very you know, squat, bench and deadlift heavy, as opposed to the other exercises that you know, other sports or other athletes may be doing?
Yeah, I think so. I think variability is very, very important. But for powerlifters, you want less variability, which is interesting. And that's why breathing and restoring range of motion isn't necessarily going to make you a better powerlifter. It's going to make you feel better, probably, but it's not going to make you better at putting up a bigger total. So that's another thing to, but if you're injured, then it's a cycle, because if you're injured, then you're not going to be able to train as long. And then you're going to spend time rehabbing and not getting better. So I make the argument in my book that if you're going to train for a longer period of time relative to your competition, you automatically have a leg up. You automatically have something they don't. Because how many powerlifters you know? It's like the classic thing we say in running too. It's like, are you training or are you rehabbing? It's like, it's one of those two things. You know what I mean? So that's why this stuff matters, because it will improve your performance relative to the amount of training time you can put in, and improve recovery and things like that. But in terms of the variability thing, yeah, I think people who are used to or spent years being an athlete and have the variability in their system is the same thing as like you build a lot of muscle and then you lose it. Let's say you got, let's say you broke your leg. So your quads, your hamstrings, your glute on that side just kind of withered away. And then when you go to put that muscle mass and strength back on, it comes back so much quicker. You know what I mean? So that it's the same sort of principle for that as it is with variability, or like getting on a bike again. So if those people were exposed to a high level of variability early on in their lives, I would make the argument that those people would have an easier time getting out of a very stiff, extension heavy pattern that they would be putting themselves into with powerlifting.
Yeah, you say that obviously with powerlifting you need sort of less variability, because it's probably one of the very few sports that, you know, your training is actually got to be the competition that you're doing, and you know, there's quite a lot of you mentioned quite a lot about, you know, single arm and single leg exercises, and you know, there'll probably be an area of the powerlifting world that will be like, well, why do I need to do a split squat? Because I'm squatting with two legs. You know, how is that going to benefit me? Because you know, it's the thought process of, I want to get a bigger total. I need to be focusing on these lifts. Whereas what have you found to be the pros and cons of adding in single arms and single leg? And, you know, ultimately, how can that, because I think sometimes you've got to put across that there's always got to be a reason behind why you're putting something in and how that's going to impact your the end result, which is obviously the performance.
Most definitely. Every single exercise in that program is selected for a very specific reason. So I'll put it to you this way. So it's just like periodization for sports, right? If you're in the off season, you generally want more variability. You generally want more GPP, general preparation. And then as you get closer to a competition, you get more specific. You take variability away in many sports. You start to get highly, highly specific to the demands of the task in the sport. Powerlifting is very similar, right? So I make it very clear in the program that if you're in an off season, or if you're, you know, more than 8 weeks away from a competition, this is probably a fantastic thing for you to do. But if you're coming up to a competition, then I would make the argument that you probably need to spend every single ounce of your training volume and time 100% specific to your goals. And then once you're done with the competition, go and then start to restore a little bit more variability so you're not locked into one place. So the general guideline I gave is 8 weeks out. But generally speaking, it can vary from person to person. I just encourage common sense there. But as for the actual exercises themselves, I think you can have the best of both worlds in terms of variability and specificity if you're being smart about it and you're not, you know, 2 weeks out from a competition. I think if you do, this is generally what I recommend in the program. Have your primary lift, have your fun, go on the platform, lift a bunch of weight exactly how you need to, and then do the same thing for your secondary lift or your secondary block. Do the same thing, have at it. But in your tertiary block, in your accessory work, at the end of the session, you can still have a alternating cable row or an alternating landmine row or, you know, an alternating dumbbell row, and you can still load that thing up. You can still get a lot of weight and you can still get a lot of alternation. You can still you're still going to provide yourself a stimulus, but it's not like you're going to be providing a bilateral symmetrical stance stimulus. And that's what matters. And then if you're doing the daily drills in your prep, and then I think that's going to be sufficient for a lot of powerlifters. The exception being someone who's already currently very injured and needs a more specific rehabilitation protocol.
I think that's one thing you said there is you know, using your common sense with it. I think, you know, sometimes when it comes to you know, a single leg or single arm, you know, thinking, well, you know, how can I fit that in? And it's like, well, yeah, actually, you know, we aren't going to be wanting to do split squats or anything like that up until, you know, 2 weeks out from a competition, because, you know, we need to be focusing in and becoming as specific as we can because we've got a competition in 2 weeks. Whereas, yeah, I think with the blocks of training that we can have, you know, because, you know, really, unlike you know, baseball, football, rugby, they perform every week. So, you know, there's a shorter turnaround. Whereas, you know, a couple of conversations that I've had with other coaches is powerlifting is one of the few sports where, or weightlifting, or, you know, potentially strongman, you might have 12 weeks between a competition. You might have, you know, 6 months between a competition. So, you know, like what you say about, you know, having a spectrum and thinking about where your training is going to be right at the start of that block. You know, you can have a little bit of variability, get that done, get that movement sorted, and then you become a little bit more specific. And, you know, you can see by some of the top powerlifters out there who, you know, are at the top of the game, they are doing that variability. And the most consistent ones, I would say, you know, you mentioned there about, you know, if you're injured, you just end up getting into a vicious cycle that, you know, they look after themselves as well. And probably the fact that they are doing these things is, you know, one of the things I'll say to clients is, you know, I don't just want you strong for this 12-week block or however long the program is. I want you to keep getting stronger. I want you to keep lifting weight, which is, you know, the goal that I think everyone should be aiming for. You know, we said there about, you know, the older you are, or the longer you've been training, yes, we need to take that into account and, you know, maybe change things around a little bit, but, you know, you can still get stronger from there, which, yeah, I think that was a good way of looking at it, because, yeah, I can just imagine now there's quite a lot of powerlifters thinking, oh God, I'm going to have to start doing single leg stuff now that the gyms or competitions aren't happening. But, yeah, I thought that was a good answer there. One thing that I just wanted to touch on, because obviously we've spoken about, you know, the time frame between competitions and adding in a little bit of variability. I just wanted to sort of have or touch on your thoughts on sort of performance versus health. So, you know, sometimes, and this is not just powerlifting, this is just sport in general. Sometimes at the elite level, people have to go beyond what they need to do to reach that next level, you know, which could be CrossFit or you know, powerlifting as well, to be able to get that world title or national title or everything else. But at what cost does that have to health? And, you know, within this context, I'm kind of talking about obviously the health of their movement and their joints, and what kind of your thoughts or experience are on that. Is there some times where you might potentially try and reduce the amount of, you know, health on their joints and their movement to increase performance? Or, yeah, what are your thoughts on that, if that kind of makes sense?
For sure. Yeah, this is a really interesting conversation I have. I'm not trying to plug my products. I'm just trying to like give context. So in my biomechanics program, we talk about this extensively, and we talk about how much of it really is a spectrum. For example, in my I'll connect all the dots here. In my assessment protocol, I have a very specific sort of range of motion goal I want for the general person to have. And when I'm working with someone, I have 3 phases. I want them to take them from phase 1. Once they pass that, phase 2, phase 3. And then from there, you got to understand if they're an athlete or a general population person. If they're general population, it doesn't matter. But if they are an athlete, then we got to understand, are they in season, out of season, or are they approaching their season? Because if you're an athlete, then an extension pattern is pretty much across all sports how you're going to be successful. You know, low back arch, for those who don't know what an extension pattern is, high central nervous system drive, sympathetic fight or flight, like your body's wired and you're ready to go. Like if you stood up right now and puffed out your chest, I immediately feel more alert. That's essentially what an extension pattern, an extension tone is. So that's important to have, but that also can take away certain ranges of motion variability from your system. But it's also how you perform at a very high level. So there's a balance to be found. And if someone's out of season, just like a powerlifter, I want them to be able to hit their range of motion goals that we have set and their performance goals that we have set for the off season. But if they're in season, that's going to change because they're not going to have full variability. They're not going to have full range of motion. So I will sit down with that athlete and determine these are the specific range of motion goals and performance goals and numbers to hit in the weight room that I want us to be able to maintain throughout the whole season. And if you dip below this threshold, then that is going to be an indicator that we maybe have pushed you too far. And these are very individual. They're by no means like a blanket statement you can put on any type of athlete. So let's say, for example, I want your shoulder internal rotation as this, baseball pitcher. I want it to be 60 degrees or more in season. If they get to 40 degrees one day, then I'm going to be like, okay, well, what happened? Like, let's do all the lifestyle factors. Let's discuss all these different things, not just biomechanics that could be playing into why your range of motion is limited today. I'm probably not going to sweat it if it's one day, but if it's a consistent theme across 2 weeks, then I'm going to say, okay, we probably pushed you very far in the performance realm. We need to bring you back a little bit to make sure that this isn't a huge red flag. And there's a world where that person could have that limited range of motion, but as a pitcher, shoulder internal rotation is pretty important. So they probably need to have that. So but they could also just do that and they could be totally fine the whole season. Who knows? It's impossible to say. But I do know that if we can keep them in a certain range where it's realistic and they are going to lose some in season, then we can find the balance of the performance and health spectrum. I think the only time where you really need to push people in one realm of performance is for, once you start getting into the higher levels of like a powerlifting meet. That's a perfect example of when you really need to push someone far into the other end. But if you're, for example, a baseball pitcher, or if you're a football player, if you're a basketball player, where you have a lot of games throughout the season, then you're probably going to need to oscillate a little bit because you're not going to have 4 weeks off to restore things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I quite like that as an explanation and having a markers and a range to be in, because as you were sort of speaking, and I was kind of think of we usually have markers on, when people come into the gym on how they're feeling today, and have like a marker of okay, so actually it could have been sleep that might be an issue why this result is a little bit further down. But if a lot across the board, if we're consistently hitting it, then it means that, right, we can get after a little bit in training, or we can drop training down a little bit depending on where we are in the season or the training block or anything like that. But thinking about that in the context of movement as well is something that actually I've not actually really thought about like that. Having a marker of, right, actually is the training that we're doing limiting movement and having a negative effect, or are we staying across the board? Obviously, you mentioned that from the higher end, with football players, baseball players. How would you then do the same thing with sort of general population? Is it just the same, and you would have the same markers, or do you have a separate criteria that you're going to be looking at with the general population? Because I think it's a little bit, we mentioned it a little bit at the start, that at the high end it's going to be small little margins, and you have that you have the access to be able to keep on top of that. Whereas general population clients, they've got work, they've got other stuff potentially going on. How would you use that with the general population?
For sure. Yeah. So I think defining general population, I would say a general population client is someone who has they have no sort of athletic or just any training goals that are going to transfer over to other realms of their life besides the gym. They want to feel better. They want to move better. They want to look better. So if that's their goal, then I'm not really going to be very concerned about, specific instances of the year of when they need to hit certain markers or stay within a certain range. I'm going to have that certain range be pretty much consistent throughout the entire year, given some leeway for variability, considering like maybe at some points in their program you're pushing a little bit harder than others. So I just use common sense with those people. But generally speaking, if they're going to come to me on day one, they're not going to be where I want them to be. So I want to get them to where I want them, and then I want to keep them there within a realistic extent. So it's probably going to take them between 8 and 12 weeks for me to get them to the point where it's like, all right, you are in a fantastic place right now. Let's now just keep you here within a realistic margin. And then I'm going to basically just monitor that every, week or two. I might have them do a little bit of an assessment just to make sure we're on the same page. And that's how it works with my online clients too. Every week we have an assessment. We ask what's going on. If things don't look the way we want, but if things look good, we're like, all right, everything's looking fantastic. Let's just keep chugging along.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, and having the layers of how you can monitor things. And one thing that kind of moving along from that is we've spoken a lot about how we can add these in and the impact that they have, and the daily routines, the warm up. And what are your thoughts on? Because obviously it's kind of the thing of injury prevention gets thrown around, quite a lot, and it's easy to say this prevented injury when no injuries happen. Whereas when injuries happen, you can say, oh yeah, that's, you can pinpoint it. But trying to predict it, I think is, it's going to be quite hard to predict injuries. Mm-hmm. So with if clients and athletes didn't add these things in, is there a strength limitation that they're going to have? They're going to end up hitting, and that could be a month, a year, 10 years down the line. Would you be more inclined to say, they are at a higher risk of injury and have a ceiling that they're going to hit in terms of how much strength they can actually perform, if that kind of makes sense? I think I went around the houses to explain that a little bit.
I'm glad that you took the time to say it like that, because I think, given what you said and how you said it, I would be inclined to say yes. If you look at the literature and what makes people feel better, it's improving range of motion and getting you stronger. Those are the things that make people feel better, as far as we're pretty much aware, and improving things outside of the gym too. Like, are you happy with how your life is going, kind of thing. So let's just assume that's taken care of. Improve range of motion and get you stronger. Those are the things that matter. So if you're not going to improve your range of motion, or if you're going to have very limited range of motion, but you're really strong, then you're missing a piece of the puzzle. And I would be inclined to, just by deductive reasoning, to say you are probably more likely to have an injury. Do I know that for a fact? Absolutely not. But I would be very, very inclined to say yes, based off of my personal experience, watching other coaches who are very experienced say the same thing, and just kind of common sense. I think if you are going to not have a certain range of motion, let's say in your hips, you're going to find it at the nearest place, which is either your knees or your low back. And I think that's just the joint by joint approach. That's Michael Boyle. That's just, someone who's been around the game for a very long time. So I think it's important to have that range of motion to a certain extent, because if you don't have it, you're sure going to find it somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, because you can't say there's been a common theme throughout this chat of just using a little bit of common sense around the movement, and nothing is a definitive answer. Like we touched on it about the breathing. If we're going to do breathing, that's going to get you stronger, that's going to get you PBs. It is just one piece of the puzzle. And it is, I do find the whole concept around injury prevention, no one can ever predict it until it actually happens. But the thought, or the quote that I quite like, is that you're not trying to get it right every single time. You're just trying to make sure that you don't get it wrong, and giving people the tools to be like, look, if we do this is going to give us the best possible chance of having the longest shelf life that we can, which is, training, getting stronger for as long as we can, and making sure that, we're not having any setbacks with with injuries, which I think is a good way to look at, and kind of fits in with everything that we've been chatting about. Quite a lot of topics and tangents covered there, but from what we've chatted about, for everyone listening, this is the big question. What would be your take-home points or words of wisdom for everyone listening?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, if I could give, are we talking about powerlifters or are we talking just anyone in general?
Let's do both. All
right. Let's talk about anyone in general. So if you're just a, general population person listening to this, then I would say, make sure that if you're training, that you understand the influences of what the body is designed to do. And that is to walk, to run, to lift things, to put things down, and to survive. So if we're only doing things one way, we're going to adapt to things being one way. So just make sure that you're doing things in the gym, and it doesn't have to be your primary or secondary lifts. Just make sure that you're doing something. You're doing alternating action movements. Engage, get your abs moving a little bit. Make sure that you can own both flexion and extension. If you want to know more about that, go check out my Instagram page. I have a ton of examples on how you can do those sorts of things. Make sure that you can breathe. Make sure you can breathe well, because there's a lot of science that says if you don't breathe well, you're going to die. So make sure that you can go and own that and make sure that your breathing pattern is sufficient. I have a ton of YouTube videos on that. If you can give yourself some alternation, you can give yourself some variability, give yourself a little bit better breathing pattern, you're probably going to be a lot better off. Same thing applies to powerlifters. The powerlifters also need to understand their demands of the sport. So if they're going to be in a position where they need to lift a ton of weight, then you don't necessarily want lots of variability all the time, but it's important to still be able to access that, or else I would, going back to what we were just talking about, be highly inclined to say you're at more risk for an injury. But again, it's impossible to say. But powerlifters can get a lot of bang for their buck just by filling in the gaps of what they're not getting. It's the same thing of like a distance runner who does more speed work is going to increase their overall potential for output because they're filling in the gaps of what they don't already get. Same thing for powerlifters. What do powerlifters usually not have? They're usually not very good in flexion, and they're usually really poor breathers, and they're usually very stiff. So if you filled in those gaps just a little bit, those people would feel a lot better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that was some really good points to finish on there. I thought it was a little bit of a curveball saying both, but yeah, handled that really well with some points there. And I think it's a good point taken away from there is, depending on what your level are and what your sport is or anything, I think the dosage of all of these movement variability and everything is going to be dependent on the person. It isn't going to be, if you're a powerlifter, you don't have to, spend 4 hours every day doing breathing and mobility and everything, same as a general population client. But yeah, small doses across the course of the week, and dialing it up and down when you need to, I think is a good way of looking at it. Yeah. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Conor. From looking at the Bulletproof Powerlifting, from looking at the content you put out there, it definitely makes me think a lot more, and piecing the puzzle a lot together. So I really enjoyed that. For everyone listening who might have any questions on the topics that we've covered today, want to have a look at the content you're putting out there or the products that you put out there, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Sure. And man, I just want to say I really appreciate you coming on here. You're an awesome host, and you're really easy to talk to. So I sincerely appreciate it, man. But people can find me at Conor, CONOR, like Conor McGregor, _Harris, and then _ right after that. That's both Twitter and Instagram. And then my YouTube, if you just put my name in the search bar, I'm sure it'd come up eventually.
Awesome. For everyone listening, 100% check out the work that Conor's doing. I know since finding his content, finding his products, it is really interesting, and it's with a purpose. It's going to help you improve your performance, and like what we've chatted throughout this chat is increasing that shelf life and making you keep getting stronger and keep performing, which we touched on it at the start. That's the whole point of this podcast. That's the whole point of what we're doing as coaches, to help you guys get stronger and keep having success. So thanks a lot, Conor, again for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Thanks, Stephen.